Hello, my name is Maria Andrea Bernal Cruz. I am an LLM student at Penn State Dickinson Law. I am currently enrolled in the Manglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equality. For the Lab's Witness to History project, we are capturing the personal experiences of women during a dynamic era in the United States. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Jackie Drummer to join me. She's a lifelong educator, an author, a mother, and a grandmother. Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Maria. Thank you for having me.
Sure, let's get started. So let's start at the very beginning. When were you born?
I was born in 1949, shortly after World War II.
And where were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on Lake Michigan, in a very small hospital.
Oh, and growing up, who lived in your home with you?
I lived with my mom and my dad, and I had a brother, have a brother and a sister. And we lived in a neighborhood that was kind of a poor neighborhood for most of my upbringing, and we moved a number of times as well.
Oh, okay. And were you the oldest sibling, or what was the order between you?
I was the oldest. I have a sister who is approximately a year, almost a year younger than I, and a brother 4 years younger than I.
Okay. And did both your parents work outside the home?
My father always worked, as I recall. My mom went back to work when I was in fifth grade, and so she was a stay-at-home mom while we were younger and chose to go back to work later as we were all planning to go to college and our family needed money.
And what did she work?
She worked at T.H. Chapman, which is a large department store, and she was the head of the beddings and linens department. So she knew a lot about, towels and sheets and things like that.
Mhm. Okay, that's nice. And what did your father do for work?
My father worked for Briggs and Stratton Corporation, and they built small engines like for lawnmowers and snow blowers and things. And most of the time when I was young, he worked in the receiving department. And then when I went to college, he actually was a purchasing agent. So he finally moved up to a job that was paid more and was probably more to his talent set.
That's good. And between your parents, how were responsibilities divided in the household?
I would say that most things were traditional, except for the fact that my dad really was an awesome cook. And so he did a lot of the cooking. He had been a cook in the Army, and he did a lot of the cooking until we were old enough to do the cooking. My mom was a great baker, but she did not enjoy cooking. As far as the household responsibilities, it was pretty traditional. He did a lot of the outside things, car things, and my mom did a lot of the inside things, taking care of the home, the children, making sure that we all had clothes and dental appointments and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, you mentioned that your father was in the army, and that you were born right after World War II. Did your father serve in World War II?
Yes, he did. He was in Germany, and
Oh,
he was a paratrooper, and yes, he did serve at the Battle of the Bulge.
oh, well, that's amazing.
Though he never wanted to talk about it, as many
Yeah, I
veterans
bet.
do not.
Yeah. And between your siblings, how did your parents have the same expectations from you and your siblings?
Hmm, That's an interesting question. I would say because I was the oldest, I had to forge a lot of the pathways in my family. Um, and I would say that probably my brother got away with a lot more than my sister and I did because he was the baby and my parents had a lot more experience. So, but yeah, I would say for the most part, our parents expected us to use our abilities and to do well in school. They wanted us to be kind people. They wanted us to give back to our communities, and we all are doing that even as adults.
And as a young child, how did you guys give back to the communities?
As I recall, we were very active in our church. We all sang in the choir. We had a family quartet. My mom was the manager, but the four of us sang. We sang at many functions. Um, we also helped our neighbors a lot. So we were expected to help shovel for our elderly neighbors and cut their lawn and check on them and deliver groceries, things like that. So it was very community centered. However, my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, were part of a community in the inner city, a church community in the inner city in Milwaukee, and they were much, much loved there. And so we often went there and helped in the church. Sometimes we'd clean the church. Sometimes I was part of a quilting circle for a while with a lot of older ladies, and that was a delightful experience. So I would say that we weren't terribly involved in global issues, but we were very involved in local issues.
Yeah. And do you recall any conversations you had with the older ladies at the time? Like, what were they like, and or anything like that?
This was my grandma's generation, so probably they were in their 60s, 70s, some older. They came together every week to sew, and they made quilts for people who needed warmth all over the world. And I would say that their conversations were often about their families. Sometimes they were about community issues, but very, very often they were a kind of therapy for older women. And my grandma used to always say that if you had a good friend or two, that you never needed to have therapy because you could just talk to your friends. And that's exactly what they did
Mm.
at quilting circles.
Oh, that's awesome. And apart from them, do you remember what other women were doing at the time? In what spaces at work were they?
Sure, sure. Probably my most influential relative was my Aunt Audrey, and my Aunt Audrey was my godmother, and she was very politically active. And I remember as a child that she would often write letters to the editor to the Milwaukee Journal, which became the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Practically every week, there was some kind of article that she took a stance on. She also, as well as my grandparents, were Sunday school teachers. And unfortunately, some of her Sunday school students ended up in prison. And she wrote them every week to encourage them and just to keep them, knowing that someone really cared about them. Throughout her life, she was very, very politically active on many, many fronts. And I think her activism generated in at least my brother and sister and I a sense of responsibility for our country and our world.
Oh, that's great. Do you remember when you were little, what hobbies or activities did you enjoy doing aside from your volunteering work?
Sure. Our family did not have much money. We were quite poor, and so we had to rely on activities that were provided in the community, or we needed to make up our own. So, for example, the schools often had recreation programs. The library provided bookmobiles that went to playgrounds, and that was awesome. We could check out as many books as we wanted every week and return them and get new books. Um, and then we had a number of kids in our neighborhood, and we played a lot of baseball and soccer. We had a big field near our house, although we were quite in the city. There was an open lot, and we kids made use of that. We had a lot of game nights with friends and family. We sang a lot, had a lot of friends at our house hanging out, did a lot of singing and a lot of planning for events. We sang for the 4th of July, for instance, on stage at a park, that kind of thing. So those were the kind of activities, lots of activities with church choirs and Luther League and all of those kind of things as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And did like for sports, did girls play with boys or?
No, the girls had no sports.
Mhm.
Until I forget what act it was, girls were not allowed to play sports at all. And so they did have the Girls Athletic Association, which was kind of an after-school club that you could join if you were, athletically inclined. I was not. My sister was. And they had like drill team or cheerleader, things that supported the boys. But we
Oh,
girls were not allowed to do that until much later. And I was so glad to see that happen because so many girls are athletes and they deserve the same kinds of benefits and activities that boys do.
yeah. And do you recall at that time what did you want to be when you grew up?
At that point in my life, when I was younger, until about high school, I honestly wasn't too sure. I knew I liked children. I knew I was pretty good at teaching. I remember I was given a chance to be the teacher for 4th grade Sunday school, and they gave me all the boys because they
Mm.
thought I could handle the boys. And actually, I enjoyed it a lot. But when I was growing up, there weren't many choices for women. You could be a teacher, you could be a secretary, you could be a nurse, and those were pretty much all that girls aspired to. I also knew that our family did not have a lot of money, and it was pretty clear to me that unless I could find the funds, I would not be going to college. We just couldn't afford it. And there were three of us that would be in college at the same time because my brother actually skipped a grade in school, so we all would have been in college at the same time. And I clearly remember one Thanksgiving, I was probably 15, maybe 16. We were at my grandmother's house sitting around the table, and I mentioned that I wanted to go to college. And my aunts and uncles were just, aghast. They were like, all you want to do is find a husband. And I said, no, I actually would like to be a teacher, and that's how you get to be a teacher. And I sat there for a minute and they were ganging up on me. And my mom pounded her fists on the table and she said, educate a man and you educate a man, educate a woman and you educate a family. And then I knew I was going to college. However, I still
Oh, that's
had to
great.
find all the funds myself. My dad said, sure, you can go to college, but you need to find all of the funds yourself. So fortunately, I had school counselors who just took me under their wing. My parents had no idea how to do the financial part. Um, and they helped me fill out all the forms. I got into the college of my choice, a small liberal arts college. I had grown up in a big city. I wanted a smaller experience. Yeah, in between scholarships and babysitting professors' kids and editing the newspaper and being an RA, I managed. So, and as did my brother and sister.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yep. But again,
Yeah, really motivated to go
yeah,
to get to school.
exactly. And slightly motivated to prove my aunts and uncles wrong.
That's
However,
also a great motivator.
however, I did get married shortly after college, and that was not necessarily in the plan.
Yeah, there you go. Circling back to your schooling years,
Yes.
before we move on to college and your family life. Do you remember in elementary school, middle school, high school, in any of those, if you had a dress code, were you allowed to wear pants or just skirts?
No, heavens, not pants, unless it was 20 below, and then you could wear them under your skirt. Um, but no, we had to wear skirts. Girls had to wear skirts and blouses. In high school, I recall we had to kneel on the gym floor and our skirt had to touch the floor. And if that did not happen, we were sent home to get an appropriate outfit for school. So that even continued at my small liberal arts college until my junior year when we were finally allowed to wear pants. And it was cold there. We were right on Lake Michigan.
Oh,
In my opinion, that whole idea was kind of foolish, but in retrospect, that was the norm.
yeah, that's true. Do you recall what did your teachers look like when you were in school?
Um, I would say that most of my teachers were, until high school, were women, with very few exceptions. Most of them were a lot of them were unmarried, as I suspect. I can't prove that. In high school, there finally were more men teachers, and I was especially drawn to my economics and sociology teacher just because he really valued my opinion as a girl at the time. And I had not found that necessarily to be true until then. He was very forward thinking and had a huge impact on my life. He's actually the one that recommended when I was in high school that I don't know if the word is audition or be interviewed to win a trip to the United Nations to represent the city of Milwaukee. And I actually did win that trip. And so I had an awesome time in New York. First time on a plane with a group of 7 kids from the Milwaukee area and a chaperone. Experienced Broadway plays, but really, really fell in love with the concept of the United Nations.
Really? Uh, did your work after involve a little bit about the United Nations or social studies, I guess?
Yes, I would say even though social studies was not my major, I have always been interested in the world. I'm a big reader of The Economist. I know what's going on not only in the United States but in the world, and have traveled to every continent. And I'm sure that was the seed was planted in high school, going to the United Nations, and by a teacher, a male teacher, who believed that girls can do things too.
Oh, that's amazing. And he was kind of your mentor during high school.
I would say that that's true. And I also had a mentor in college, one of my professors who just saw some real talent and gave me some real opportunities to expand my horizons, which was awesome.
That's great. And not these teachers, but do you recall any different treatment between girls and boys during your schooling experience?
I would say the rules were different for girls, the clothing rules for sure. Certainly curfews and things were different for girls, but at school, I would say for the most part, it seemed like we were treated quite equally. I can't think of any instances where that was not true. Boys were given preference for a lot of things, sports, clearly. Often I noticed in high school they were called on before girls. They were given more airtime. And the parameters of their behavior were a little larger than for girls. So they could get away with doing goofy things or saying things that girls could not necessarily do.
They were giving a pass for being rambunctious in class or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think they still are, actually. And I
Yeah.
know as an educator, part of that is developmental, and I certainly understand that that is true. But it has been true in my experience for a long time.
In classes that were offered, do you remember if there were some classes like shop that were
Oh,
for men, or for
yeah,
women you got house studies?
home ec, yeah, home economics. Yes, absolutely. And I don't think it ever happened that girls were allowed to take shop classes and boys took home economics. That happened much, much later when I was actually an educator. Um, but at the time, that's all we knew. We didn't know any differently. I had no inclination to take shop classes. Had I had that inclination, maybe I would have pushed for it. But I'm not particularly handy and had no interest. So
And what were your interests during school? What were your hobbies?
Um, well, in school, I would say that I was especially interested in English and language arts. I'm a speaker, um, foreign languages, music, definitely. Music was a huge part of my life, and we'll get to that later, but it has been a huge part of my life. I've sung with conductors from all over the world, so it's been awesome. Um, but hobbies, I would say I did not have too many hobbies, mostly because our family didn't have money to support them. So where other kids were taking piano lessons, or other kids were doing horseback riding, or had various hobbies, we pretty much had to figure it out ourselves. We were the kids who came in when the street lights went on, and mom and dad pretty much said, take care of yourself, figure it out, have fun, see ya. So that's
Yeah.
what it was like.
Yeah, but did you join the school chorus, or
Oh,
you
yes.
take music classes?
Yes, I sang with all of the school chorus groups. I also sang with, in Milwaukee, an audition-only group called Music for Youth. And so had to audition every year. We got to do major works with symphonies when I was in high school. And I did a lot of work for the Luther League of Milwaukee. I was president and secretary, I want to say. And in high school, I was in a number of clubs. I was the president of the Future Teachers of America, student government secretary, I think. That's a long time ago. But a lot of leadership activities. And I've always said that I don't go looking for leadership, but it seems to find me. So there you have it.
And how were you pursuing them, or how did that come about? Like, what made you think that, yeah, I can take on this leadership position?
Yeah, I think, when I'm in a group, it seems like other people encourage me, or they say, let her do it. I always had a lot of ideas. I was not afraid to express them, but I never wanted to be bossy. I was always trying to figure out the line between leadership and bossiness. And I think that that's a big thing that women especially have to do. When we are outspoken, there are words that are used about us. When we have too many ideas, or we're too loud, or we're too this or that, women pay a price, or have paid a price for that. Maybe not so much now, probably still. Uh, but yeah, so you navigate those waters very carefully. But I always found myself thinking, I can do this. I have the skills. I had the writing skills, the speaking skills, the people skills that I needed when I needed them.
And were your parents encouraging of your activities?
They were like, well, sure, go for it. I would say my parents were not pushy, but they didn't hold us back either. They kind of let each of us find our own areas.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Mm, during the 60s, during your schooling years, there were a couple of legislations that were passed, federal laws that were passed. We had the Equal Pay Act and the Civil Rights Act, which respectively prohibited sex-based wage discrimination and
Yes.
prohibited discrimination in the workplace. Do you recall if by any chance you had any conversations about it? You heard people talking about that?
Oh, yes, and experienced some of it. The 60s was a very turbulent time. It was an awesome time as well. Many things happened during the 60s. Sexual revolution, race riots in Milwaukee. I remember being under curfew. And I think it was 1970 or 1971 summer, the whole summer. It was 1971, right before I went to college. Um, I knew that women could not get credit cards. I knew that women could not get mortgages by themselves. Um, my mom had something called a charge-a-plate that she could only use at the store in which she worked. And it was guaranteed by her income in that store. But, there was no option for women to have those kinds of things. And we had those discussions often, especially with my Aunt Audrey, who was a single woman and never was able to take uh, any opportunities on her own at that period in time.
Oh, yeah. And did your aunt Audrey, I guess, yeah, you told me she was very influential, but she discuss this legislation with you?
Yeah, she did, and she wrote letters to the editor too. Many
Oh,
letters to the editor of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Um, I think, she knew that we were in a tender time, especially my sister and I, we were so close in age, um, that she wanted us to be fierce females. She wanted us to stick up for ourselves. She knew that we were living through lots of societal changes, but she wanted us to have a grounding in what's right and fair.
oh, that's awesome. And during this time, you made your decision. You wanted to be a teacher.
Yes.
Before that dinner with your aunt and uncle, do you remember what did you started to like about education that made you decide, yeah, I think I want to be a teacher?
I like kids, first of all. I was a good student myself, so I liked school. Many teachers become teachers because they like school and are pretty good at it. Um, I I'd had a couple of really fine teachers, and I wanted to be that kind of teacher. Um, and I would, as I said earlier, there weren't that many choices. Um, when I was in high school, I worked as a secretary in a number of companies just to make money for college, and I knew I did not want to do that forever. Frankly, between between us, it was my job to make salesmen look smart. They would write these letters and they couldn't spell and they couldn't write a cogent sentence. And so I'd clean their act up and they made lots of money and I was making, peanuts, that kind of thing. So I know I didn't want to be a secretary and I knew I did not want to be a nurse. So that left teaching.
And then you graduated. You already told us you go to college. Do you remember your graduating class, if they had the same path as you or if they chose something different?
I would say that many of the women went into education or nursing, some into the business field, but generally entry positions. They didn't, upon their beginning these careers, they didn't start at the same level as men, not during that era for sure.
All right. And the boys in your class, did they attend college or did they choose another path?
In my high school class?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I went to Milwaukee Marshall, and Milwaukee Marshall at that time was a premier high school. It was a junior senior high, actually, and we were in a very Jewish neighborhood. So education was very, very important to a lot of the Jewish families. And so, yes, I would say that many of the kids, at least the kids that I hung out with, went on to become, important in the business world, the medical world, psychology, those kinds of things. I did have one female classmate that became a psychiatrist, now that I think of it, but most of us ended up in education or nursing.
Oh, and did you guys, like as a friend group, did you feel any pressure aside from your aunt and uncle, of course, to get married instead of going to college?
No, no, I think probably because I opposed it so vehemently at the time. I was like, one thing at a time, or as they say in Spanish, una cosa a la vez.
Yeah, there you go. Mm, so with your you went into teaching, and what did you want to do with your teaching degree in college?
Yeah, when I went to college, there were a lot more teachers in the pipeline than there are now. And so I knew I needed to be competitive. And so I picked up an elementary education certificate and an exceptional education certificate, which was highly sought after. And I had a minor in German and I had a minor in music. And the final two were mostly because at that time, elementary education majors were time consuming, but they were not as stimulating cerebrally as I wanted. So I added some minors just to keep my brain active and to keep me doing something that challenged me.
And did you start learning German in high school, or did you start in college?
Started in high school, but it was my minor in German.
Okay. And so in college, you already mentioned that you had a mentor. Do you had any other mentors during your college years?
I would say probably our college choir conductor was and still is a very good friend of mine. He just opened the door to many new musical pieces and made me want to make music forever for the rest of my life. And so after I graduated from college, I actually auditioned for the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra chorus and sang with them for 44 years. And so I've gotten to sing all of the major works in the world, I think, or most of them, and sung with conductors from all over the world. And music definitely opens doors, many doors in our lives. So I would say that that mentorship was really, really important to me as well.
Yeah, and what was that experience like to get to sing with the symphony?
Oh, I love it. I loved it. Just, it was awesome. I was a paid singer for a while and a section leader. But the most important thing was just the community of singing. There's research that says that our heartbeats synchronize when we sing together. And I really believe that that's true. I think our minds synchronize. It's a great way to put the cares of the week aside during rehearsals and performances. And to know that you're making a difference in the lives of people in the audience is really awesome. You give a lot and you get a lot back.
And how is the relationships like with your fellow singers and fellow musicians?
Musicians, yeah. Uh,
Music, yeah.
uh, awesome. It's like family. I'm no longer singing with that group. I sing with the community chorus. We've moved to a smaller city right now. Um, but I'm still really good friends with many, many of those people. Our kids grew up together. We shared our joys, we shared our sorrows. We breathed together, and made lovely, lovely music together. Some grueling schedules, often performances took a whole weeks of time with rehearsal and performances and things like that. But it was an experience that filled the rest of my life besides teaching. It gave me something bigger.
Oh, that's great. And do you, what did your peers look like in the symphony? The musicians, the singers?
Oh, I would say this particular chorus was an audition only chorus, but we drew from all walks of life. We had butchers, we had teachers, we had doctors, we had secretaries, we had college students, occasionally a high school student, but the schedule was pretty intensive, and so it prohibited some high school kids from being able to, carry out the full schedule. I would say that we were all people who were committed to the same goal. And of course, you have to work together in order to make beautiful music. And so we loved each other, and we had a lot of fun too. A lot of parties and a lot of hanging out after concerts. Yeah, it was awesome. It was a great part of my life.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing, amazing time.
Mhm.
During your college years, I'll circle back to college again. Do you have any particular class or teacher that we were like, okay, this is what I want to do?
I would say I was most influenced by Dr. Lloyd Mellis, and he was our exceptional education professor. And he helped me get a grasp on what it means to work with kids who are outside of the mainstream of education. Um, and I think he, without realizing it, planted the seeds for me to end up in gifted education. Because originally I was working with children who have learning differences and learning challenges. And while I enjoyed that, I really wanted to work with kids who are the most underserved in our educational system. And there's some research out there, quite a bit, that proves that our gifted kids are the kids that are least receiving the services that they need in order to to match their full potential. And so after I started teaching, I taught first grade. Well, I taught in early childhood for a bit while our kids were little, and then I taught first grade, but I ended up in gifted education, and that's where my heart is.
Oh, that's awesome. We'll discuss that a little bit later.
Sure.
Do you remember what your classmates looked like?
Most of them were girls or
Mm,
women, young women at the time. Um, and I think most of them were I would say more interested in social life at that time than I was. I was more of a serious student, and I didn't have time to do a lot of socializing because I was financing my own education. And so I was working a lot in addition to going to classes. Um, so a lot of them were in sororities and things like that. And that just was not my cup of tea at the time. I didn't have time for it.
yeah. And what jobs were you working while you were in college?
Okay. Well, I was a resident assistant for 2 years. I worked on the school newspaper. I did a lot of typing, babysat college professors' kids. And I also, I made, believe it or not, $2 a page to type because we didn't have computers, to type and edit papers for students, particularly football players. Um, I made them look really good. And actually, at that time, $2 per page was pretty decent money. It was my pocket money. So I would say that every opportunity I got on breaks, also I worked in an office as a secretary and during the summers.
Oh, so you had a full plate during your college year. You were nonstop.
Always, always.
Oh, that's great. And I know you didn't have that much free time, but do you remember if you watched any movies or TV shows at the time that were popular?
That's an interesting question. At that time, we didn't have TVs in our rooms at college. I was fortunate to have a radio, and I remember listening to WFMT, the granddaddy of classical music out of Chicago, and loved it. But I would say that we didn't watch movies. They did not have movies on, regular TV. There was a lot of just 1 hour programs or half-hour programs on TV at the time. And the only TVs that were publicly available were in the student lounges. And I think that's it. So, we just didn't have those things. We didn't plug hardly anything into our college room. A couple decades later, they had to rewire the whole university because kids brought so much electrical stuff to school.
Yeah, that's true. And how about magazines? Do you remember maybe Miss Magazine, Vogue, or Teen?
I was aware of them. And you could check this out at our library at the college. But again, I did not really have a lot of time to read those. Those came more into my life when I had my own daughters. And we can talk about that a little bit more about my feeling about some of those magazines.
Oh, and what were your feelings when you discussed it with your daughters?
Well, I always felt that my kids could read anything that they wanted to. I didn't want to, decide what they should read, but I also read along with them. And then we would discuss the kinds of things that were in those magazines or even some of the music that they listened to, is that really socially acceptable? That kind of thing. I felt that a lot of the female magazines were expecting women to reach certain standards of beauty and popularity and acceptance that were unrealistic. And truly wanted to have those discussions with my daughters because I knew that a lot of young women were being highly influenced by those magazines and were changing their lives and doing sometimes dangerous things, anorexia, bulimia, to achieve those standards. And so I wanted to keep my girls grounded and but I didn't want to prohibit them from knowing what was out there.
Oh, that's good. And when you were young, that like the beauty standards of the time, did that affect you in any way?
Well, I would say that I was never really totally into that. I mean, I knew I wasn't the skinniest girl around. But as my dad used to say, this is the way we're built, He used to call me lovingly Solid Jackson. And at first I thought it meant that he thought I was kind of chunky, but he later explained to me that he thought I was a pretty solid person, personality wise, that I had good grounding and I was a solid person. So I guess it was a compliment.
Yeah, yeah. And you finished college. What year did you graduate from college?
I graduated in 1971.
And after graduation, what were your plans? Joining the workforce, higher education,
Yeah.
or starting a family?
I actually had three offers for teaching, and I
Well,
chose one that I thought most matched. And I actually had those offers early in the year, like long before summer. And I chose the one that I thought would work the best for me and my husband at the time, because we got married shortly after college. Um, I knew that I was going to teach. I knew I wanted to get my master's degree. And I wanted to do that before I had children because I really began to sense that all the things I wanted, I could not do all at the same time. Um, and so that was kind of the order. I graduated, I got married, I started my first teaching job, and then immediately began working on my master's degree at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee.
and was your husband supporting of you working outside the home and pursuing your higher
Oh,
education?
Oh, yeah. He came from a pretty progressive family as well. And frankly, he had to serve in the military because, as you know, the draft was in place. And in 1970, his draft number was 32. And 32 meant that he would go to Vietnam. And that was not anything that we were at all in favor of. And so we had to make some big, big choices. And he chose to join the National Guard to do his civic duty. His dad had been in Korea, and my dad had been in World War II, and so he felt that that was important, but he did not definitely want to go to Vietnam. So this whole time, we're struggling with. I have a job. He could not get a job because he knew he was going to be going into the Army. I wanted to start working on my master's, and he was like, "You go, girl. You do what you need to do, and I'll do what I need to do, and together we'll do what we need to do."
Oh, again, that seems like a very full plate at the time for both of you.
Yeah, and not only that, his family owned a resort
Oh,
uh, up here in Baraboo, and we worked many, many years up here all summer long. So we taught all year, and then we worked in the resort all summer long. There was no downtime whatsoever.
yeah. And that offer for your job, you told me they offered you, but did you have any interview process for that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we always had interview processes, and men interviewed us, of course. I'm not sure why they chose me, but I think, I had the double certification. I think that was probably an important part of being chosen. And I was willing to teach any grade, whatever they wanted. So,
Do you remember if in the interview they asked you anything about family planning?
oh yeah. As it turned out, in 1975, I got pregnant and our son was due in 1976. And I asked for a leave of absence and they denied it.
Oh, and so that was
Like,
before the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. So were you fired from your job
I
or?
wasn't fired, I quit.
Oh,
Because it's different on your resume if you're fired than if you quit. So I just chose to resign at the end of that school year, in June, and our son was actually born in late June. Yeah, and I decided I would not go back to that school district again for lots of reasons, but one was that it just seemed unfair. I was a good teacher. They often brought administration into my classroom to see what I was doing because my kids scored so well on tests, and yeah, it just seems super unfair. I was very angry at the time.
oh, yeah. If you were a great teacher to just be given that response, it must have been terrible.
It was terrible, and it kind of left me with a bad taste for that school system in my life. I still look back and think, golly, they made a lot of mistakes during that era because they lost a lot of good teachers. A lot of us chose to have our families, but we did not necessarily want to resign.
Hmm. And that's what was that position? What school was that?
It was the Oak Creek Franklin Joint District #1. It was near Milwaukee.
And what grades did you teach?
I taught first grade and second grade for 5 years.
Oh, okay. And after that, where did your next job was?
Okay. Well, I had children then during that next few years. And because I did not want to work full time, because I had three little ones, I worked at an early childhood center and I was a teacher, but I was also one of the coordinators of the center. It wasn't daycare, it was actually a preschool center. And I really loved that a lot. It was a great thing to do at that point in my life. I had a chance to influence the lives of little kids and many, many families. Uh, but then, you do that for a while and then your kids start growing up and you have a few more options. So,
And you told me you have three children.
yeah.
Were they born after 1978?
Nick was born in 1976, Mari in 1980, and Emily in 1982. So,
So did your experience with your daughters being pregnant with them, did you have any trouble with being pregnant and still working with your workplace?
no, not at all. No, that particular center was much more understanding. And things were changing, things were changing in the communities as well. More women were working, although not like they are now, certainly. But more women were working part-time and they were much more accommodating. Of course, I had to find my own substitute, but
Oh, really?
yeah, that's kind of the way it works for women. We have to figure it all out. So,
Yeah. And did you get maternity leave for your daughters?
let me think. Yes. Well, they not paid. I mean, they gave
Oh,
me time off, but it was certainly not paid. And in early childhood education, you never get paid well. Still, you don't get paid well. Um,
no.
I needed I loved my children. I loved being home, but I needed some stimulation as well. And so I chose to do that while my kids were little. And it was kind of the best of both worlds. I got to be a mom and I got to watch all my kids begin to grow up. And I got to use my talents to teach.
Yeah. And you got your master's, right?
Right. I had had my master's at that time already.
Oh, before the birth of your son.
Right.
Oh, that's awesome. So after that, you go on, your kids grow up and you start pursuing a new professional challenge. Where did that leave you?
Well, I want to say in 1986 or 7, I can't recall exactly. Our son was showing signs of having gifted behaviors, and I was a Cub Scout leader at the time. And boy, the young men that he hung around with, they were such smart kids. And I was noticing that they were spending a lot of time in school being super bored. You know, our son read 24,000 pages in his free time in school in one quarter. And I went to the school system and said, you know, there's a bunch of boys like this. What are you doing for these high-end learners, these academically advanced learners? And the answer was, not very much. You want to be part of a committee? And I'm like, yes, I do. And so along with some other parents and educators and superintendent and school board members, we investigated gifted and talented programming in our school district. And this was before we knew that the state was going to mandate it. So we wanted to kind of do it our way. So I worked on that committee for a year or two. And in the end, they hired me because I had done all my research and I knew what the options were. And I had I thought, a pretty good plan of how we could go about doing that in a district of our size. So that began my career in gifted education. And you know, during my tenure as a gifted education specialist, I started out in one building, then 2 buildings, then 4 buildings, then 6 buildings, which was the entire district. And then I added certificates in coaching and transformational coaching, systems, operational coaching. And so I was able to work with administrators, teachers, and kids. And that's when I began teaching graduate school as well. So.
Oh, and how was your experience teaching graduate school?
I loved it. I loved it. You know, it's always been a surprise to me. I started out with the littlest kids and I loved it. And then I started moving into middle school and high school and I loved it. And then I started working with college kids and I loved it. And then I started teaching graduate school and I loved it. For the most part, I would say it's pretty exciting because most people in graduate school are pretty motivated for whatever reason. Sometimes it's for more money in education. That's about the only way to make more money is to get more degrees or more years of experience. But a lot of times it's because these are the people who love to learn. And that matches my skill set, you know, teaching people who love to learn.
No, that's great. And regarding your timing the committee and working and leading that project, who did you work with? What was your team, or were you working on it on your own?
Oh, no, I was not working on my own. It was actually a directive from the school board and the superintendent, and there were representatives from those groups. There were educators, and then I think one other parent, but I was on that committee at the time as a parent.
Oh,
A parent with an education degree, but a parent.
and when they hired you, what did your peers look like?
I would say at that time, most of my peers were young, unmarried women. Um, because, you know, a lot of the women were struggling with the same thing I was. When you have a family, it's pretty hard to figure all that out, all the childcare and all of the scheduling and all the things that requires. So I would say that most of them were unmarried, although as time went on, they did have children. Many of them took leaves of absence because you finally could do that and came back to their jobs. There were some men, and again, more of the men at the high school level, some at the middle, but very few at the elementary level.
Oh, okay. And um, and now you told me that you've written books. How did that come up? How did the opportunity to write books come about?
It came up kind of serendipitously, I would say. Um, One of the things that happened during my career was that when I started teaching graduate school, I began to realize that I had a lot of material. You know, I had a lot of ideas, and I had started a lot of groups in the Milwaukee area, the Partners Advancing Gifted Education group, which is still in existence 30 some years later, which are parents and educators working together to provide exceptional education for gifted students. I knew that I knew that I had tried a lot of stuff myself. I knew what worked. I knew what didn't work. And then my husband and I became nationally certified SANG trainers and facilitators. And SANG is the Supporting Emotional Needs of the Gifted. It's a national organization. There are 33 national trainers, and my husband and I are two of those 33 trainers. And so putting together all my teaching experience, my graduate teaching experience, my emotional social needs training. I wrote part of a book on parenting gifted kids, and it was all over the world. And my chapter obviously was on the United States, but Turkey, Israel, all different countries are in that. My second book is actually in publication right now, and it is What Does Gifted Education Look Like in the 21st Century, which is more of a talent development model. Rather than anointing kids with 135 IQ as gifted, we're looking at talents in kids and fostering talents, see a need, serve a need, if you will. And then the third book was part of the Storyworth Project. I don't know if you're aware of the Storyworth Project, where they ask you a question every week about your life, and then you write, and then they put it all together into a book for you and your family and your friends. So that's where I'm at. I'm considering writing a book or a chapter, at least for the National Association for Gifted Children. They're looking for authors as well.
Oh, that's great. And what do you like most about the writing process?
I like to write. I like words. I like ideas. I like making things clear. I like making things intriguing. And for some reason, for the most part, is pretty easy for me. And I've done a lot of editing in my life, so I know, kind of how to get a point across most succinctly. So I do love to write. My mom often told me when I was little that I would be a writer, and took me till I was probably 40 to become one, but I did.
Oh, that's great. And with this amazing career that you've built since you started working, how did you manage your working life with your family home?
Wow. I would say I have a fabulously supportive husband, and that we work together. We're an awesome team. He is he's kind, he's generous, he's open-minded. You know, we both believe that there are periods in each of our lives where each of us needs to take a little bit more responsibility, one person more, the other less, and vice versa. And so that has worked very, very well. I would say too that I've been blessed with good health and a lot of energy. I'm 75 and I'm still going pretty strongly, I think, mostly. And so that makes a difference. And I think I've always had a kind of a spiritual underpinning, not necessarily religious, but a spiritual underpinning that gives me a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning.
Oh, that's great. And do you recall what did you like the most about becoming a mother?
Kids are amazingly funny. They also bring out the best in you and the worst in you.
Oh,
Um, they bring out the best because they're so much fun and they're so awestruck and open-eyed and just, you know, um, delightful to be around. But, when you're tired or when you're hungry or when you're stressed out, they can also bring out, the worst in you. And so you learn a lot about yourself by being a parent, a lot about yourself.
yeah, that's true. And did you always knew you wanted to start a family? Did you want to get married?
I think I knew that I wanted children, but I had always been pragmatic enough to know that there's an easy way to do things and a hard way to do things. And so I was willing to defer gratification, to make sure that I got my education, my master's degree and all of that, and had children then after we were secure financially and emotionally, because, I think a lot of people don't realize that you need a lot of security in your life to do well for children, that they need to have a stable environment.
And what would you recommend to create that stable environment?
I've always recommended education, first of all. But I think I think it's important that you can afford the children that you have, and that's getting increasingly difficult, I think, in today's world. And when I say afford them, I mean financially afford them, but I also mean emotionally afford them, because children take up a big part of your emotional life as well as your physical care and support. And so, um, I've been a big proponent of birth control and family planning, because I've seen kids that do not receive what they need to be functioning, happy adults, and I want for all kids to be secure.
Oh, and did you, in your youth, circling back to your college years, maybe, do you remember any conversations or what you thought about the conversations when um the feminine liberation movement was happening?
Sure, sure. We burned our bras. I thought it was awesome, but then I always had a feeling that women had been undervalued for a long time. And of course, the sexual revolution was happening, and birth control pill was finally, received and used. And of course, I used it for a while when we were first married because we had other plans for a while. Um, and I just thought that that finally gave us all an opportunity to find ourselves before we created other littles in our lives.
Oh yeah, for
I thought
sure.
it was awesome, and we lived through so many things. There was a sexual revolution, a cultural revolution. The 60s and 70s were an amazing time to be alive, and also kind of a scary time because the grown-ups in my life were a little concerned about us. We weren't concerned, we were living it.
And what did did you discuss any of that with your parents or with your aunt?
I would say that certainly they were aware of it, but we were a pretty close family. And so I would say that my brother and sister and I did not really, we didn't act out in any ways that had them too terribly concerned. Um, my sister was at Madison, at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and she was part of a lot of the protests there. But I was beyond that. I was teaching at that time and I was married, and so I was not part of that. And my brother, I think, was too young at the time. So, my parents, I'm sure, were concerned that times were changing, if you will. Um, but they were also pretty sure that they had grounded us pretty well.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and now let's talk a little bit more about your you now. What does a day look for you nowadays?
Well, I'm a retired person, so my time is more of my own. I've been retired almost 10 years. I retired when I was just about 66. Um, that was a kind of a crucial time in my life. It was terrible. So many changes had happened in Wisconsin. Scott Walker was governor. He imposed Act 10 on teachers and public employees, except for police and firefighters. And we were no longer able to have unions or well, we had unions, but we weren't really able to bargain very much. Our wages were stagnant. People were saying anybody that could breathe could teach, which is not true. Um, Teachers were becoming more disrespected. So after some serious soul searching, I decided it was time to retire. But I wasn't done really, because I have always had, at least for the last 30 years, my own consulting business called Education Works. And I had been steadily picking up contracts over the years, working with school systems about gifted education matters. Um, and so I had probably been in over 200 school districts and agencies in the Midwest. And so I continued to do quite a bit of consulting. Also wrote a number of grants and have been delivering grant services. Um, I'm still doing a lot of work for SANG, supporting the emotional needs of gifted. So working with parents and caregivers in the area of gifted and talented and raising gifted and talented kids. Singing with a community chorus here in town and the Village Voices at Christmas time. Writing. I am the editor for the newsletter for the Wisconsin Association for Talented and Gifted. So I do a lot of writing. I blog every month and I edit everybody else's work and put together the newsletter every year. My husband and I are active in Friends of Devil's Lake. We live near Devil's Lake here in Wisconsin, Devil's Lake State Park. And so we're part of their big, they're considering building a big cultural center here. We're part of that project. We swim there's the Ho Chunk House of Wellness on the Indian reservation near us, and we swim and work out every day. And our time is our own, and we travel a lot. We have been to all 7 continents, and we cruise, but we also, just do a lot of traveling on our own. Done backpacking and Eurail passes and all
Oh,
that stuff. So as we
and
get older, we're doing things that are a little more comfy, but yeah, it's awesome.
yeah, but when did you guys start traveling all over the world?
Yeah, probably did most of our traveling beginning in about 2000, because our kids were all grown up then, and we had a little bit more time and more money. We were both teachers, so we never had a huge amount of money, but enough to be comfortable and eventually to travel. So our
And
goal is use all our money, and enjoy our lives. So that's what we do.
do you have any particular experience that you recall from your travels that you just like, that you remember with great happiness?
I think, there's so many. It's so hard to say. We traveled with a group, we were singing in Europe, and after the group went home, and we were in lots of countries, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, sang at San Marco, sang at the Dome in Salzburg. But after the group went home, my husband and I had our backpacks, bought a Eurail pass, stayed for a month in Europe, and just followed the spirit, woke up in the morning, did what we wanted to do. Love that. We had a foreign exchange student from Brazil live with us for a year, and so we've been to Brazil a number of times, and that's been awesome. I do love the people and the country of Brazil. I love Iceland. I love fire and ice. Just the geological activity there is absolutely awesome. And then because our youngest daughter was in the Peace Corps in Nicaragua, and then now works for Catholic Relief Services and has been in Afghanistan, Malawi, and now Guatemala. We've had a chance to visit her, and I'm loving Guatemala as well.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds like a great, even though you still do a lot of things, and it doesn't sound very retired to me, but it sounds like you're living an amazing life right now.
We are. And, we are very fortunate. As I said, we have enough money to do some of these things. We're not rich, but we're secure, certainly. And we have our health. And that's really, really important at this stage of life, all stages, really.
Yeah, that's completely true. At the beginning of our interview, I described you as an educator, as an author, and a mother. How would you describe yourself?
Now, I'm an educator, an author, a mother, a lover. I guess I'm just more world aware than I ever was when I was younger. Um, yeah, and a caregiver.
Yeah, for sure. And looking back at all that you've experienced during your life and achieved, what makes you most proud of looking at your younger self?
I I think, boy, that's hard to say. I think stripping away all the other awards that I've won and things, I think my kids and my marriage make me the most happy. For me, it's always about people, always.
Oh,
And
that's great.
some of my past students too, many of my past students are still in my life. One of them's won an Emmy, some of them have written books. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're teachers, they're moms. It's just to hear their life's trajectories and to hear that they still remember some of the things that we did together that influenced their lives. We do touch the future. We teachers do.
Yeah, completely agree. So now, as we close our interview, I want to thank you for sharing your story with me and our audience. It was a pleasure to hear your story, and I'm very excited to see the impact that your story will have um, in our project.
Thank you, Maria. It was great fun for me to have sort of a retrospect of my life as well. And I thank you for this wonderful opportunity.